You're watching Euronews now. I'm Takumbo Salako with you throughout the afternoon with the latest developments, reactions and analysis on Russia's war in Ukraine. After signing EU accession papers, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the European Parliament. We'll have the latest. A Russian airstrike targets the center of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, as a 60-kilometer army convoy closes in on the capital. And on the move with no particular place to go, an estimated 500,000 people are now said to have fled the fighting in Ukraine.
Air raid sirens are once again heard in Kiev, with reports of a Russian strike on the outskirts of the city. The thump of distant shelling is getting ever nearer. Across Ukraine, terrified families huddle overnight in shelters, basements or corridors. Russian forces had earlier shelled Ukraine's second largest city, rocking a residential neighborhood. Dozens of people were killed in the missile strikes on Kharkiv, according to Ukraine's Interior Ministry. Moscow says it's not targeting civilians, but the International Criminal Court's prosecutor wants to open a probe into possible war crimes. Satellite images now reveal a huge convoy of Russian armour, about 65 kilometres long, advancing on the capital, Kiev. The Russian offensive has so far met with Ukrainian resistance, and amid growing international condemnation, Russia is finding itself increasingly isolated. Stepping up his rhetoric, Russian President Vladimir Putin denounced the US and its allies as an empire of lies. The European Union has added 26 more people to its sanctions list imposed over the invasion, including some of Putin's closest confidants. His own press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, is on the list. Along with a number of journalists, the EU has accused of spreading anti-Ukrainian propaganda. Shell, Europe's largest oil company, is the latest oil giant to cut ties with Russia's Gazprom. It's to exit 4 oil and gas joint ventures valued at about $3 billion. And Turkey, a Russia ally, has closed the Dardanelles and Bosporus to military ships, saying it cannot abandon its ties with either Russia or Ukraine and wants to prevent an escalation of the war.
Ukraine and Russia have held their first peace talks since the start of the war last week. A delegation headed by Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov traveled to the Belarusian border yesterday to meet with Russian officials. Kyiv called for a ceasefire and immediate withdrawal of Russian troops, but fighting continued for the duration of the almost 5-hour talks. Russian President Putin told his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron that Moscow would pull out only if Kyiv remains neutral and formally recognizes Russian control of Crimea. No major breakthrough was achieved during the talks, but both parties have agreed to meet again later this week.
Ukrainians, fearing time is running out to leave Kyiv, flood into a train station in the capital in a bid to catch a ride to a safer place as invading Russian troops close in.
We are leaving today because we are very scared to be killed by Russian soldiers. We are very scared to receive a rocket to our underground, our house, and we try to live just to stay alive.
We bring our cats, we bring our children, and we would like to find some safe place for them.
An estimated 500,000 people, most of them women, children, and the elderly, have already fled Ukraine to neighboring countries, according to the UN.
Приблизно 2 дні. Дуже великі затори були.
We stood there at the border for 2 days. There was a big traffic jam. We were there with the children, but there were volunteers. They gave us tea and food.
які надавали нам гарячий чай, їжа.
And in Romania, EU Commissioner for Home Affairs Olva Johansson visited a border crossing where thousands of refugees are being cared for.
My specific responsibility as Commissioner for Home Affairs is to make sure that those people that can make it to the border to the European Union should be warmly welcomed.
Long lines of cars and buses were backed up at checkpoints at the border of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and non-EU member Moldova. Others crossed the border on foot and dragged their possessions away from the war, seeking safety.
Well, as sanctions continue to mount against Russia, ordinary people are starting to feel their effects in their daily lives. Let's turn now to Moscow, where we can talk to Alexander Solovyov, a board member of the pro-democracy group Open Russia, about how Russians are reacting to the war. Well, thanks for taking time to speak to us here on the programme. We've seen over the last week or so many Russians taking to the streets, defying the threat and the prospect of arrest and possible persecution as well. How's it been for you?
Well, it's really dangerous right now in Moscow, especially for everyone who were doing opposition politics, because it's impossible to do anything right now. And a few of the activists has already been arrested, and it's not administrative arrest; it's a criminal case. And more than 2,000 people has been arrested during the last protests, and the last days, and more than 5,000 protesters have been arrested during the last 4 days through all over the country. So people are trying to protest, but I know that a lot of Ukrainians are criticizing us for being not radical enough, but people are really afraid because the authorities right now has warned everybody that any kind of support towards Ukraine would be designated as a treason, and people would end up in jail for 20 years.
Okay. You mentioned the criticisms and complaints that have come from Ukrainians regarding the demonstrations that have taken place, sentiments that are shared in the wider world as well. When you hear those types of complaints, how do you feel about that?
Well, of course, I feel responsible for things happening right now in Russia, but at the same time, I cannot blame my people for being cowards or something like that, because you cannot blame people in a concentration camp for not escaping or for things that administration of the concentration camp does. So we are living in concentration camp, just as like Belarusian people.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the sanctions now and the effect that they're having on Russia and ordinary Russians already. Do you think that that's a price worth paying? How can the international community best help people?
Well, the international community can, first of all, can now do something to save those minds who are strongly against the war. So the sanctions in the way that they are imposed right now basically restrict mostly those who want to abandon Russia just because they do not support Vladimir Putin. But now those people have to stay in Russia. So I think the best help would be to create some kind of special lists for those who used to be against this regime, and to save those minds, just as Western countries did in 1939 towards Germans trying to abandon Nazi Germany.
Time for us to take a brief break on the programme. We'll be back in a few moments.